Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video in which we are doing a deep dive review into Shane Dawson's first book, I Hate My Selfie. The first 3 parts of this series are going to be linked down in the description below of this video, but you don't necessarily need to have watched them all to watch this one. You can kind of watch them in any order, but there are going to be a couple of references here and there where I say stuff like, so again we're seeing, so if you want to watch the others, go for it. If you're new to my channel and my videos, hi, great to see you. My name is Rachel. I do kind of book reviews, sciencey videos, history type videos, social commentary, lots of feminism and pro-LGBT stuff and all kinds of fun stuff like that. You might be able to hear my dog Kyra snoring next to me because it's late and she's sleepy, so sorry if her grumbles get loud, but she's a gorgeous girl and this is her house as much as mine, so I'm not going to move her. She's happy. Babes. Don't forget to subscribe for new videos and stuff like that if you like what you see, and it really helps if you like and comment on this video to help me with engagement and getting views and good stuff like that. And I'm going to shut up talking and jump into the video. Chapter 10 is called The Mean Girl Got Fat, and going into this I didn't really know what I was expecting from this chapter, but I'll be honest, the only mean girl I've seen in this book so far is Shane. So Shane starts off by telling us that he is currently working as a salesperson in a weight loss center. There's a few rude jokes at customers' expense and a really horrible description of his co-worker Mag, which horrible, mean, why, completely unnecessary. And then he gets his promotion and he says his client on his first date turns out to be someone that he went to school with, and he writes, "I saw an overweight young woman sitting nervously reading a magazine. I knew Lacey. I instantly had flashbacks to 2 years prior when I was sitting in my high school biology class passing back a stack of tests to the girl behind me. It was Lacey. She was thin, beautiful, and everything that terrified me about women. She was a cheerleader with a 4.0 grade point average and more sexual experience than the sex ed teacher." The subtle slut-shaming. Again. Ugh. One time she'd corrected him because he said that the vagina only had 3 inches of feeling and she had proof it was 9. She was a mean girl in every sense of the word. Every day she would ask me questions about my outfit or my appearance, not because she was curious, but because she was trying to make her horrible friends laugh. So yeah, that bit is quite mean, I'll give him that. He says that she'd mock him in school for being overweight, and he describes her as a soulless demon monster, and she was now sitting before me, 300 pounds, and potentially my first sale. Then there's a hell of a lot of calling her a bitch and fat-shaming her, and it's very uncomfortable to read. And his co-worker suggests that he gets revenge on, and I quote, "that pom-pom twirling." She apparently says, "Sign her up, then give her to me as a client. I'll make sure she doesn't lose the weight. Hey, I can even get her fatter. I'll tell her that she should do the mayo and cream cheese diet. It might even kill her." Probably one of the most revolting things I've ever read. And if this actually happened, both Shane and his co-worker are horrible people. Now, I was bullied relentlessly in school, and I've not really spoken about it in much detail. I've just kind of mentioned that it happened. But I had a horrific time, and I actually had a girl who I went to school with come up to me in a takeaway at Christmas, maybe 3 years ago, something like that. And funnily enough, she didn't recognize me. But basically, like, it started because I was there with Dan, and we'd been out walking Kyra, dropped Kyra off with my parents, and then gone to the pub for a few drinks. And we were getting a pizza on the way home. And there's this guy in the takeaway, and he's just bitching about his girlfriend, like nasty, horrible stuff. And I step in and I'm like, "Mate, you shouldn't be talking about your girlfriend this way. Like, what is your problem?" And so kind of like we chatted a little bit. Like, I was a bit like, don't talk about someone you're dating this way, it's horrible. Anyway, and as I'm saying this and basically trying to defend this random woman, this woman comes barging over, who turns out I went to school with her, and she was one of these girls who was a bit nasty to me. She wasn't the worst by any means, but just her and her friends were just not very nice. And she just starts in on me for no reason, and she gets nasty. And just out of nowhere, for no reason other than the fact I'm talking to her boyfriend, she just starts mocking me, picking apart what I'm wearing, my accent. She starts in on Dan and what he's wearing, and the fact that, we were wearing jogging bottoms and looked a mess, and there's all this nasty stuff, and there was name calling, and she was acting like an absolute child. And I kind of had a little laugh to myself at the time, because while she's like calling me names for looking a mess, she was drunk off her face. She'd put on so much weight. She was like spilling food down herself, and she was so drunk that mid mocking me, she like gagged a bit and threw up a bit in her mouth and like dribbled a bit. It was horrible. Ugh. Makeup was smeared like she was an absolute wreck. I kind of felt sorry for her, but at the same time, she was being really nasty. She'd been really nasty to me in school. So, do you know what my revenge was that night? Our pizza arrived and me and Dan left, and I said to her, you know what? You might not remember me, but I'm so happy I didn't turn out like you. And then I left and I went home with Dan and we cuddled Kyra and we ate pizza. And it was great. And I felt on top of the world because I was like, at least I'm not like this. At least I'm not nasty to strangers in public. At least I don't have a boyfriend who hates me. At least, like, I'm not a drunken mess like this. Like, there were a lot of things. And I was just like, yeah, I've done well for myself. I'm happy, and that was my revenge. That said, when I was making this video, I did look her up on Facebook, and it turns out she's still with that guy who's being nasty about her behind her back in the takeaway like 3 years ago. So, yeah, I still have a lot of pity for her. But not the point. The point is, I've been in a similar situation to Shane here, where you see someone who's nasty to you, who now you're in a better position to them. And my reaction was just to feel good about myself and be happy and just leave her be, not to plot with a co-worker to try and ruin their health, you know? I don't quite get this logic. So Shane proceeds to ask this girl questions, this woman at this point questions, and again, it turns out like she doesn't recognize Shane, so just like the person out at school didn't recognize me, this woman doesn't recognize Shane. So Shane asks her questions about her situation, and then basically uses all her answers to publicly shame her in this book to a few 100,000 people. So he shames her for being 20 years old and a overweight single mum, which is disgusting. Like, it turns out she's only put on weight because she was pregnant and now she wants to lose it, which is a completely normal thing that happens to a lot of women. And I completely applaud her for saying, you know, I want to take back control of my body and my health and feel good about myself and do something about it. There's literally nothing to shame or mock there at all. And so what if she's a single mum? As long as she's caring for a kid, that's what's important. He literally kind of like admits to sort of pitying her a bit, and he says, she wasn't the evil queen bee I hid from in high school. She was a sad girl who'd been through a lot of hardship since then. I didn't quite know how to deal with this revelation. I wanted to cry, but I also wanted to punch her in the face for calling me six-pack back fat for 4 years. But from the looks of it, life had already punched her in the face. So clearly this woman is sad and struggling, and she admits to Shane to being depressed, so Shane obviously decides to make some comments about how her ex was mean to him. Again, as we've seen in every video up to this point, Shane keeps taking these situations and stories about other people and making it about himself. It's very odd. I know this is a book about him, but it's weird. She's like, my ex left me, this is bad, you know, I'm a single mum now. And Shane's like, oh yeah, I remember when he bullied me. The woman says to him, I'm tired of hiding. I haven't seen any of my friends for over a year because I don't want them to see me like this. I was so scared to even come today because I thought that maybe someone would recognize me. Which does kind of break my heart a bit, and I wish Shane had spent a bit more time exploring these feelings and this experience of hers and talking about them, because I actually think her words here are something that a lot of people can relate to, and I think it would help a lot of people to know that others go through it. And I think it's really, really damaging that he's shaming her because she's admitting these things. Lacey opens up that high school wasn't actually so great for her, and Shane's like, what, really? I didn't know that. It wasn't good for me either. And he ends the chapter by writing, I was upset that she didn't remember how horribly she treated me, but I guess I never thought about her reasons for doing so. She must have been dealing with a lot of issues that made her take her anger out on me. It doesn't make it right, but it makes it slightly understandable. So I think this is maybe one of the better chapter endings, and it seems like he kind of has a good point in here and that he maybe learned something, but it doesn't really make up for the fact that he spent most of this chapter publicly shaming this woman for basic stuff that everyone goes through, like putting on a bit of weight and being depressed and going through a breakup. You don't get to publicly shame someone like that and say, but maybe I get why she did it, and just expect it to all be okay. So overall, this chapter, my feelings are really mixed. Chapter 11 is weirdly called My Girl Space Friends, which I had no idea what to make of, and now, having read it, it's not that clever. It opens with Shane writing, I'm not really what most would consider a manly man. Hell, I don't even really consider myself a man at all. I'm more of a woman with man parts, because my brain and heart skew more feminine. I was always surrounded by girl friends. Probably not the best way to put this, maybe a little offensive, but honestly, I think if we actually read a chapter about Shane thoughtfully discussing his gender identity, his gender expression, his sexuality, but maybe him talking about his like outward personas versus his actual personality. That stuff would be really interesting to read, and I would definitely read it. I think there's a lot to be said about men writing about who they are and their identity as they kind of step away from the kind of ideas of like traditional masculinity. Great stuff. I'd love to read that. But of course Shane doesn't do that. Instead, he just goes on to tell a bunch of stories about childhood female friends of his, which is a thing, I guess, but kind of pointless. But he talks a little about one of him and his childhood female friends playing with Barbie dolls, and how he had a problem with wetting the bed, and also how they stopped being friends because he, and I quote, punched her in the vagina. I have no comments. His next friend that he brings up, he casually brings up having a lot of mental health problems and some issues that they both seem to have with boundaries, and Shane kind of dismisses them as a joke. Have a little read of this for yourself. Very telling. A lot of problems here. I'm not even going to start to try and attempt to psychoanalyze this because I'm not qualified. And then in the most hypocritical part of the book so far, he writes of all his female friends. They all shared one trait. They were non-judgmental. I can't stand judgmental people. The second someone lifts their eyebrow at a situation, I cut them out of my life. I like to live in a world where people can be whoever the F they want to be and say whatever the F they want to say. It's interesting to me. Entertaining even. I'm a glorified people watcher. Are we sure I'm reading the same book that he's writing? Because all I've read so far is 10.5 chapters of Shane being rude and judgmental about people. I cannot deal with this absolute lack of self-awareness. It is an actual joke that is about as funny as the rest of this book. And then he talks about not dating a friend, he calls a bunch of people whores, he makes a disgusting joke about hitting a puppy with a car and watching videos of babies being hit by a bus, and then the chapter ends. That's it. There's no real point to it. It's just, why? But again, these stories about like hitting animals with cars and videos of watching babies die, like it again just shows he lacks any real boundaries between things like animals and children. He doesn't understand the need to protect vulnerable people. He doesn't have the same boundaries and empathy that other people do. It's just very telling and very worrying. Chapter 12 is also quite revealing, and it's called My Strange Addictions, and it opens with Shane, age 19, in a hospital, saying that he's addicted to everything, which sounds like a bit of an exaggeration, and probably is, but I do think he does have some addiction issues, which he does address in this chapter, which I think are important things to talk about. He says, when I was a kid, I became addicted to food. And not in the typical way kids do, but in a Hoover vacuum sucking up everything in its path kind of way. I wouldn't just eat an Oreo, I would eat the whole box and then move on to something else. I remember at one point running out of real food, so I started eating condiments and spices, which I know he's probably trying to say it as like a joke, but I actually think this probably happened, and I do think it's indicative of an actual issue with food, and issues with food and overeating, and especially when people try and use it for control, because as we've heard before, I think in the last video, Shane said he felt out of control a lot as a child, and this might have been one of his ways to try and gain back a little bit of that control. And so these issues are very, very real and very, very serious. And I actually think it's important for people to address these kind of issues in a thoughtful way that will encourage his child fans to actually get help when they need it and take these things seriously. And I hope he doesn't make these kind of issues and addictions and food problems the butt of a joke, because they're not a joke. And I wouldn't want his young audience to ever feel ashamed of having issues like this. So I went to this chapter really hoping that he spoke about this very important stuff properly. Sadly though, he just skipped over a lot of the food bits at first and moved on to him saying, another one of my addictions was friends. Actual friends. When I met someone I liked, I would want to spend every second with them. Every year I would have a new friend, because every year my current friend would become overwhelmed by my clinginess and stop hanging out with me. This is something that I still struggle with, but to a lesser extent. When I start feeling myself becoming addicted to hanging out with someone, I limit the amount of time I see them, which again is very, very interesting. And as we've spoken about in other videos about this book, I'm not going to say it definitely proves X, Y, and Z about Shane, but if we kind of think about his recent behaviour in terms of how he's treated people like Trisha, how he's treated people like Jeffree Star, I do think this goes some way to explaining some of his recent behaviours and gives us another kind of angle to consider it from and think about it from. What's annoying though is that, like everything else in the book, Shane just kind of glosses past this and doesn't really go into any detail. I don't really care about hearing about, I have this issue and this issue and this issue, and just him listing them off. That doesn't tell tell me anything, I don't learn anything. It's boring, it's complaining for the sake of it. What I'd actually like to know and read about is why Shane has these addictions. What does he think caused them? When did he first notice them? How did they affect his life? What does he do to try and combat the negative effects and be better? That's what I want to know. That's what I want to hear about. And it's what Shane never really bothers to touch on. Instead, it's just all very surface level, shallow, bland, quite pointless, which is a shame. He does go back to talking a little more about the whole food thing though, and we do get a little bit more substance here, which is good. And I think this next section might be one of the better parts of the book. Basically, he starts telling a story about how he decided to lose weight at 17 because he was too big to go on a ride with a fair. And then he writes, "That was one of the worst days of my life, and even thinking about it now makes me feel like vomiting into an amusement park trash can. The experience sent me into overdrive. I lost 150 pounds in less than a year by eating nothing but chicken and doing nothing but running. I stopped hanging out with friends. I stopped being able to have a normal conversation with anyone because all I wanted to talk about was weight loss and health. While I was losing the weight, I became addicted to something that was more harmful than any typical drug. I became addicted to the artificial sugar, Splenda." And he starts using it like a lot. He goes on and writes, "After 2 years or so, I got up to 2 full boxes a day, which added up to about 250 packets. I started talking about it on my YouTube channel, and kids would send packets to my PO box. Boxes and boxes were kept stored in my powder-covered garage. It looked like I was involved in some kind of drug smuggling operation." So, yeah, this seems like a problem. And then he actually starts talking about all the issues he had, and he doesn't glamorize it, and I think that is a very important thing for his teen and child audience to hear about. And the way he's quite raw with it, and he doesn't... for lack of a better word, he doesn't sugarcoat it, I think is good, it's commendable, it's important. He says, "My life was on a downward spiral and I couldn't get a grip on it. I was constantly passing out from dehydration and having intense panic attacks that my doctor believed were side effects from too much artificial sugar and way too much caffeine. At one point my skin started to turn yellow, and not in a cute fake tan way, in a holy poop, why is that guy yellow kind of way." So he gets dehydrated and he nearly passes out at Disneyland, and he has a full-on breakdown and he ends up in the hospital. And I know it's Shane's style, but I wish he made less like jokes here and he'd kind of written about it a little more seriously, because that's what it deserves. But honestly, I think this is the best part of the book, because he suddenly realizes how seriously he needs to take care of himself, and he stops thinking about only himself for 1 minute, finally. And he writes about need to change his diet and look after his body. He says, "It wasn't just about me anymore, it was about everyone in my life. If I were to end up in a coma or even worse, dead, it would affect so many people. The taste of that sugary sweet powder wasn't worth it anymore. I know the old saying, nothing tastes as good as thin feels. Well, nothing tastes as good as being alive either. From that moment forward, I decided to get off the packet once and for all. But I want to be clear. It wasn't just the fake sugar that was causing me to go to the hospital, it was everything related to it." And then he admits that he still struggles with his diet, but he adds, "I don't want addictions to rule my life. This is a huge reason why I don't drink or do any kind of drugs." And again, I think this is a great thing to admit to and be open about and talk about, because it will help other people in a similar situation. I think it's a really important thing to talk about. I do wish he'd gone into more detail, especially about the recovery process as a whole, how difficult it was, what he struggled with, what helped him, how he got to where he is today. But on the whole, I'm glad he took it seriously and ended on a good note, so thumbs up for that chapter. On that note, that's where we are going to end this video today, and I'm going to pass this over to you guys to tell me what you think of this book so far, not just the chapters we've covered in this video, but in all videos so far. We are getting near the end of this book, so if you want to, I guess, kind of like keep updated about the next videos, then please subscribe to my channel and hit that little bell notification, because I don't really have a set upload schedule. I just kind of upload as and when I can, as often as I can. So yeah, it'd be great if you want to stick around. I really appreciate it. But yeah, thanks for watching today. I appreciate you guys a lot, and I'll see you again very soon.